So here's just a quick overview of today's session. In a moment, we're going to hear from Sam Furio with Maryland's Department of the Environment, who's going to walk through BEPS. What is BEPS? Who's covered? What are the milestone requirements for covered buildings, and as well as some reporting requirements related to benchmarking and other reporting. And then we're going to hand it over to my colleague, Michael Miranda at NHT, who's going to share some best practices and lessons learned through our own efforts to reduce emissions energy consumption at our own portfolio. Then we should have plenty of time for Q&A, and then I'll quickly just highlight our upcoming sessions. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Sam, and you can pull up your slides.
Sounds good. Thank you, Madeline. Share these. All right, Madeline, can you see those?
Think it's, yeah.
All right, sweet. All righty. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Sam Furio. I'm the outreach coordinator for the building decarbonization team at the Maryland Department of the Environment. Our team's responsible for implementing the building energy performance standards for the state of Maryland. Thanks to NHT and SAFE and New Ecology and all the folks involved in this great cohort for having us on today and for putting together these great webinars. So really great to be here with you all today. I'm gonna do kind of a 101 on the BEPS program and as Madeline said, what's a covered building? What are the requirements? What are the timelines? And if you have questions, I think, if you want to, throw them out while I'm presenting, that's totally fine. But as Madeline said, there's Q&A at the end as well if you just want to hold on to them. So either way is good. And then I'll have some contact information at the end. You can reach out if you have additional questions or need additional clarity on the program. So today I'm just going to talk BEPS background, how the program came to be, again, what a covered building is, or a building that needs to meet the requirements of the regulation. We're going to talk what building owners need to know, performance standards, portion of building energy performance standards, and then getting started and resources and resources and flexibilities that are specific to providers of affordable housing in the state. So that's the run of show for the day. And with that, I'll kick it off to talk BEPS background, how it came to be. So in 2022, Maryland passed the Climate Solutions Now Act, which set some very aggressive climate goals for the state. They're actually some of the most aggressive in the nation. And they are to achieve a 60% reduction in statewide greenhouse gas emissions by 2031 and achieve net zero economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions by 2045. And so these are very aggressive goals. And Maryland's pushing the way forward in the U.S. And along with establishing these goals, the Climate Solutions Now Act also required Maryland Department of the Environment to implement building energy performance standards to help meet these reductions. And so, today we're talking BEPS, but if you have interest in other policies that the state is implementing to meet these climate goals, you can read the Maryland Climate Pollution Reduction Plan online today. But we're all here to talk building energy performance standards, so I'm going to now focus in on that. BEPS is now in effect for the state. It was finalized at the end of December of last year. And as I said, it aims to reduce emissions to meet the state's climate goals and specifically emissions from Maryland's large buildings. It also aims to reduce energy costs for Marylanders and improve indoor and outdoor air quality for Marylanders. So I said large buildings, and those are buildings that are 35,000 square feet or larger, excluding any parking garage area. And we call those buildings covered buildings because they're covered by the regulations requirements. So these covered buildings must annually submit a benchmarking report to MDE starting this year that comprises the energy use data for the covered building. And that first benchmarking deadline is September 1st, 2025. So only a couple months away. And this first report's going to include the calendar year energy use data for 2024 for these covered buildings. So In addition to annually benchmarking and reporting the energy use from the building, building owners or owners of these covered buildings are going to have to start meeting phased emission standards in 2030 and beyond, or pay for excess emissions over the standards. So what do these covered buildings tend to look like? We model that there's over 9,000 buildings in the state that are going to have to meet the BEPS requirements. On the screen, I've got a chart of what the primary property types of this covered building list are, and they fall into warehouses, office spaces, multifamily housing, and retail stores. Where are these buildings located? Well, they're located all around Maryland. They're in absolutely every county, but as you can see on this map, they are primarily located between Baltimore and DC along that I-95 corridor. So let's say you've got a covered building, it's 35,000 square feet or larger. Well, there's some property types that are totally exempt from the regulation. They just need to apply. And those are buildings that are designated as historic by local, state, or federal law, K-12 schools, elementary, secondary schools, manufacturing buildings, agricultural buildings, demolished buildings, and buildings owned by the federal government. I think particularly something that's relevant for you all today is there's some additional flexibilities in the regulation for providers of affordable housing, which I will get into more a little bit later. But I mentioned at the beginning that there's the performance standards that start in 2030 and a payment that would be made for excess emissions over the standards, where there's a flexibility in the regulation for affordable housing providers to receive reduced payments for those excess emissions. So I'll get into that in more detail near the end of the presentation, but there's also some flexibilities for covered buildings experiencing financial distress or low or no occupancy. So let's say you've got a covered building, those total property exemptions don't apply to you, and you need to start benchmarking this year and submitting your energy use to us. So there's certain types of energy use that can be excluded from your benchmarking reports, and that's energy use from food service facilities on site, electric vehicle charging, the heating of outdoor pools, energy use with parking lots like lighting. If you've got combustion equipment on site, so that runs on a fossil fuel or combustible fuel, and it's required to run on that fuel by a state or federal regulation, that equipment emission can be excluded from your report. So if you've got like a backup generator on site and a state or federal regulation says that needs to run on diesel, you can exclude those emissions from that equipment. And then also our chosen benchmarking tool where you'll submit your energy use data is Energy Star Portfolio Manager. It's an EPA tool, it's free. And there's certain energy exclusions that are specific to Portfolio Manager that you can remove from your reports as well. Oops. So how do you get started? So let's say you determine you've got a covered building. What are the first steps that you're going to have to take? So again, I said first requirements are to benchmark and report energy use data from the covered building. So annually, starting this year, building owners are going to use Portfolio Manager to track their annual energy use and greenhouse gas emissions. And then simultaneously, once they start benchmarking, they're going to be able to start assessing how their buildings are performing, either from Portfolio Manager or seeing the outputs that we assess from the data submitted to us. And they can take that information and compare it to the performance standards, which you can see today in the regulation, and see if changes are needed to be made on site to meet those performance standards. So the benchmarking assessment phases happen at the same time. And then again, 5 years down the road, you're just benchmarking for 5 years. So annually starting in 2030, the performance standards are going to kick in. And so building owners can either achieve those standards or maybe achieve partial compliance with those standards and opt to pay for any excess emissions over the standards. And opting to make that payment is seen as being fully compliant with the regulation. So You can just choose to pay for excess emissions and be in full compliance. So kind of collapsing down all of what I just said onto one slide, reiterating the kind of building owner to-do list at this time. So first things first, you're going to determine if you've got a covered building. You can search our BEPS portal online today. That's where we have the covered buildings list and a covered buildings map, and see if your building is already listed. I'd say if it is a covered building and it isn't listed, you still have to meet the requirements of the regulation. We just need you to work to have it added to the list. And there is some information you'll need for your building in the portal in the list today to submit your benchmarking reports. And if you're going to pursue one of those relevant exemptions, maybe the total property exemptions, or in a few years, the reduced alternative compliant payment forms, you would also submit these forms through the BEPS portal. So getting acquainted with that tool today is a good idea.
Bob, hey, this is Justin from New Ecology. Two questions for you. On 818, just wondering if you saw my email about the heat pump water heaters. Do you know why two of them might have been off the last time I was there? I'm just trying to figure out if there's any issues with those.
Just a
And
reminder to
second,
folks, I think, there we go. Okay. So yeah, first steps, just determine if you're a covered building. If you've got a covered building, you're going to start benchmarking this year, 2025, and annually thereafter. You're going to start that assessment of how your property is performing. And then if you're not meeting the performance standards, plan to make improvements or pay for those excess emissions, which I will get into on this slide. So diving into the performance standards portion of building energy performance standards. First things first, building owners have a long runway to compliance in this program. This is a really long program. There's 15 years from the first benchmarking phase to the final standard. So there's a long window here. And, there's 5 years, as I've been saying, there's 5 years where you're just benchmarking your energy use data through a free tool. But starting in 2030, these performance standards are going to start to take shape, and they take shape as a phased reduction of on-site direct emissions by the type of building. So again, we're reducing emissions from these large buildings to assist in meeting the state's climate goals. And so I think, predominantly here in this call, there's probably a lot of multifamily buildings. You would have to meet specific emission standards for the multifamily property type. So in 2030 to 2034, interim standard one would start. That would be the highest allotment of emissions for, say, multifamily. And then 2035 to 2039, you'd have to meet interim standard two. So that multifamily emission standard would tighten or decrease.
Okay.
And then finally,
I'm good.
in
You can have
2040 and beyond, all buildings, regardless if it's an office building or a multifamily building, are going to have to meet the final standard of net zero direct emissions. So that's the emission standard. I would just say that we already modeled that a third of the covered buildings in the state are already meeting the final standard of net zero. So maybe they're already all electric. They don't have any emissions coming from the site of the building. So it's possible that when you start benchmarking, you're already in compliance with the final standard, or maybe interim standard two or one. And so that runway to compliance for you lengthens. So additionally, that's the emission standard, but additionally, in 2 years, in 2027, we intend to adopt an energy efficiency standard called Site Energy Use Intensity, or Site EUI. And so in the meantime, as you're benchmarking and assessing how your properties are performing, maybe doing upgrades, we recommend not installing inefficient electric equipment, such as electric resistance heating. So those are the performance standards that start in 2030. I want to get into the alternative compliance payments and how they're relevant for affordable housing providers in the state. So again, I said we have this emission standard that starts in 2030, and then you pay for excess emissions over the standard. So on the right side of the screen, I kind of have the standard payment distribution for excess emissions. So let's say building owner Jane has a multifamily building. She starts benchmarking, and in 2030, she emits 5 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent over the standard for multifamily. The price per ton in 2030 is $230. So she would pay $230 times five. There's 5 tons of excess emissions. So her alternative compliance payments in 2030 would be $1,150. So the price per ton goes up by $4 per year and is adjusted to inflation for that year. So I noted earlier on, there's a flexibility in the regulation for affordable housing to apply, or providers to apply for reduced payments. So on the left side of the screen, I have this process written out, and I have some more slides after this, but an affordable housing provider with plans to improve their building to meet BEPS requirements may apply to reduce their alternative compliance payments to a lower amount or zero. Our compliance team at MDE will review the applications on a case-by-case basis and determine a reduced payment based on the merits of the application. So that is baked into the regulation, and those applications we made starting in 2030. So just reiterating this process, so MDE may grant the application of reduced alternative compliance payments to an affordable housing provider when the building owner submits in writing such requests by June 1st of each calendar year beginning in 2031. That demonstrates a good faith effort for the regulation. So you've got some time before these applications would need to be submitted, but this process is in place. A good faith effort may be demonstrated to the department by submitting a copy of the application to a federal or Maryland administered program that would reduce GHG emissions. The submission shall also include the benchmark report, intended scope of work, and estimated GHG reductions expected from the intended scope of work. And then you would apply for this reduced alternative compliance payment every year. And so the determined amount from our compliance program would be good for 1 calendar year. And then number 4, a project that is applied to a program but has not yet completed the improvements can submit a confirmation received from the program administrator to the department, verifying the project's active participation status to satisfy the good faith effort for another year. And so just, want to reiterate, this is a reduction for the payments for the excess emissions, but this doesn't exempt the provider from benchmarking and reporting the energy use data for the covered buildings. And then you would again apply for this annually. So that's how that alternative compliance payment reduction application works. But you've got some time before those would need to be submitted. So just pulling it back to what's coming up right now. And the first requirement is benchmarking your 2024 energy use data if you've got a covered building. And so on the screen, I've got kind of the relationship between building owners and MDE and how you're going to interact throughout this program. And so there's 2 main tools that MDE is using for BEPS, and that is the BEPS portal, and that is our own in-house tool that you can find on our webpage today. And that's going to have the covered buildings list. It's going to have resources. It's going to be where you'll submit exemption forms or these reduced alternative compliance payment applications. And it's where you'll also find your unique building identifiers or IDs, which you will need to submit your benchmarking reports. So I'd recommend, getting tuned into the BEPS portal today and searching that covered buildings list. We also, as I said earlier, have chosen Portfolio Manager as our benchmarking tool. That is a free tool from the US EPA. That's where building owners are going to submit their energy use data to us. So you'll have your energy use data uploaded to Portfolio Manager from your utility, and then you'll basically share it with us and we'll download it after the benchmarking deadline each year. So just 2 tools you'll need to get acquainted with. A way to think about this is that the BEPS portal is kind of like a hardware store. It's where you go to get the tools you need to get the job done. And Portfolio Manager is the project site. It's where you're going to go to construct and finalize the project and finalize that submission. And Madeline mentioned that, some of these slides are going to be shared out after this. A lot of these links and images in the slide deck are clickable and can take you straight to these resources, for reference. So again, start off with that BEPS portal, determine if you've got a covered building. If you go to just search Maryland BEPS in Google, you'll find our webpage and you'll land basically right in front of this big yellow image that'll take you to a getting started webpage that tells you all you need to know about determining if you're a covered building, viewing the covered buildings list, and reading all the resources that we have available that will get you through this first benchmarking requirement. Portfolio Manager, if you haven't used it before, it's a free tool. There's great free online trainings that the EPA hosts, and there's also a service provider directory that if you're looking to hire someone to do your benchmarking for you, you can use that directory to find great candidates. But there's great resources online today to help you out with benchmarking through Portfolio Manager. So you've determined your covered building, you've got your Portfolio Manager profile set up, and now you just need to get your energy use data. So how do you do that? I really hope that nobody is manually entering their monthly energy use bills into Portfolio Manager. There is an automated process in place for building owners to acquire their energy use data. So just like building owners have requirements in the regulation, electric and gas companies also have requirements to provide building owners their energy use data upon request. So online today, we have a document called Connecting with Your Energy Data Provider that outlines the data request process for all utilities in the state of Maryland. So let's say you're a BG&E customer, Baltimore Gas and Electric. You'll see their data request process in this document, and you can go ahead and initiate that process today. And for certain utilities in the state, they will just upload it directly to your Portfolio Manager account, so you do not have to manually enter data at all. So it should be pretty automated. I would note that these electric and gas companies have 90 days to provide your data upon request this year and 30 days after this year. But that we have been hearing that most of the utilities are getting the data back to building owners within just a few days. So if you've got a covered building, try and get those requests in soon so you can fill out your benchmarking reports. So I threw a lot of information at you. If you're just hearing about BEPS, if you really didn't know much about the program, that is totally fine. We're doing all these outreach sessions, and there's still a lack of awareness of the program. So you're not behind the times at all. And this is the first year of requirements. So I just want to level set some concerns there. We're here to help you, understand the program and what the requirements, and, you're part of a great cohort here that can also assist you in this process as well. But if you need more information, if you need a refresher on what I just mentioned, really just recommend going to our web pages today. We're running informational sessions, working groups, and office hours all the time that you can view their recordings on YouTube, and also sign up for our email list so you can get updates on the regulation as they come out. So really recommend staying tuned into what we have going on online. And then additionally, resources, MDE works on the regulation and conveying the requirements. Our sister agency, the Maryland Energy Administration, works with grants and technical assistance and, financial resources. And so within the Maryland Energy Administration, there is a great resource called the Maryland Clean Buildings Hub that is stood up today and always improving. And it is a resource that empowers building owners to make well-informed energy investments and connect them to financial, educational, and technical assistance. So they have an awesome newsletter that goes out very frequently about great resources that are available in the state that you can take advantage of to, do your benchmarking, get TA, and maybe even make upgrades to your property if you need to do it. So I'd really recommend tuning into that. And as I said at the beginning, if you've got questions, you can reach out to us anytime, beps.mde@maryland.gov, or if you give us a call, that number goes straight to my desk. So, if you have questions, feel free to reach out. But with that, thanks all for listening, and I will pass it back to Madeline.
Thanks, Sam. While I'm pulling up Michael's slides, is that email and phone number that you shared on the last slide, is that a good contact information for folks to reach out if they just have clarification questions, if they do have a covered building, or is there a better way for them to confirm their covered building list? We had a question of that in the chat.
Yeah, that email is good for everything. So that goes to, general questions about the regulation. If you've got questions about the covered buildings list and, your building's inclusion on it, you can email that to that address as well, and you'll get our compliance program who can assist. I would, recommend going through our web pages and reviewing the covered building definition, because where the covered buildings list is our best effort to date at mapping all of the buildings in the state that will need to meet the requirements, but there's certainly going to be data gaps. There's certainly going to be buildings that are missing. And so we really recommend that all building owners associate with the covered building definition and see if it applies to them. And again, if it's not on the list, it's not on the map, it still needs to meet the requirements. But you can work with us to, have the building added. But use that email, use that phone number for all inquiries or all, issues you're experiencing.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam.
Mhm.
Great. And again, if folks have other BEPS questions, we'll have time at the end for Q&A, but now I'm going to pass it over to Michael Miranda to talk through some best practices and lessons learned from NHT's efforts with reducing emissions and energy consumption at our own properties. Michael?
Great. Good morning, everyone. Next slide, please. Michael Miranda, I've been working on green and affordable housing on and off since 2007. 8 years ago, when I moved to DC, joined Stephen Winter Associates, worked as a green building consultant on green affordable housing, including in Maryland, Baltimore residential towers, and was hanging around in attics in Annapolis in a courtyard affordable housing communities. And joined NHT 3 years ago as we're working through the same issues, although not we don't have an operationally controlled property that's covered by Maryland BEPS, but been dealing with DC BEPS and other benchmarking requirements in other jurisdictions. So working through the same issues that you all are. One key thing to highlight is, the requirement is clear, getting to zero on-site generation of greenhouse gas emissions at the communities. So getting to zero GHG direct greenhouse gas emissions in 2040. One key question is, depending on your property, your building, every building is different. How soon do you need to make progress to avoid fines? So the 2030 requirement is to get to 0.82 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per square foot. Can we do that with just fossil fuel cooking and clothes dryers? Probably do it with just one or the other, probably with both, and maybe a generator that's diesel or gas. But that's a key question, something to be looking out for, because that's the next target. Next slide, please. So looking at our controlled properties, this is DC and Virginia properties, 10 of them, 10 of those that I think would be the kind of the most insightful. So if you see bold numbers, that's the performance data of the 10 communities. And then for two communities, I broke them down 5 and 8 into the different portions of the community. For some of the DC BEPS requirements that we have, we report also based on like share meters and the rest, and we have different portions of the community. The key metric here is that fourth column that has coloring all the way down that's the metric that Maryland BEPS is using, direct GHG intensity. And so it ranges, the worst performing at the top to essentially all electric or mostly all electric buildings towards the bottom. Um, uh, Number 13 is an old, very old historic preservation building that had a gut rehab and all electric. Number 9 is a new construction that just has minimal gas consumption. But then the rest of our communities, it varies. And you'll see on the rightmost column the kind of the end uses in the building that are fossil fuel based. So you'll notice that, towards the top, the highest have heating and hot water. Those are the largest fossil fuel combustion loads in communities. And so, but as you work your way down, you get towards, community number 8. Um, there's a big variance in performance in that community, but really that just has fossil fuel heating and cooking on site. But it's, current performance, the best portion, the kind of most efficient portion of the community is at 0.86. So, not at the 0.82 that we would need to hit if this building was located in Maryland in 2030. And to look at the efficiency of these properties on the second column on the left is the site EUI that was mentioned. This is great, the best metric for the energy efficiency of the building. In DC in 2023, the average and median for multifamily housing was 47. So we, of course, have some less efficient buildings towards the top that also have on-site combustion. So in general, the less efficient building, some less efficient combustion as well. And so that's why the direct GHG is higher. We have some more efficient buildings as well, but it's a mix, like typical portfolios of affordable housing. One other thing to mention is, so if you want to look at how you might want to organize the community, if you might want to subdivide it as possible while meeting the Maryland BEPS reporting requirements. That's something to figure out early on. Sort of as you can see in community number 5, there's a big variance in performance of those two portions of the community, 5.1 and 5.2. 5.1 is 20% of the community. 5.2 is the remaining 80%. The big change in energy usage, probably a good chunk of it, occupant behavior, essentially the same buildings with the same systems. Some systems are probably less efficient than they should be or whatnot. There might be some issues there. There might be some occupancy differences, but you can have quite a variation in performance within just a community with the same construction, same features. I'll move on to the next slide, please. So one key thing that I found going through our portfolio and really QCing our reporting is taking a look at the gross floor area. So the definition on the top of this slide measured the GFA between the outside surface of the exterior walls. So you're measuring all the way to the exterior surface of the exterior walls. That's where you're losing heat until that surface itself. So by really QCing this, you can increase the gross floor area by 20% potentially. Some buildings of ours less than that, some more. DC just released a report with the third-party verified data. Their data correction tickets that building owners submitted to make corrections. I believe it was more than 70% of those data correction tickets were related to GFA corrections. On average, GFA increased by 22% in 2023 of the DC BEPS reporting pool of properties, which is quite significant. Hundreds of multifamily buildings, if not thousands, well, over 1,000. So one of the ways to look at the GFA, um, dwelling unit square footage, your rent roll is only a portion of the property. You have all that other common space and the rest. Hopefully you have building plans. Not every affordable housing property does. You can use the listed GFA on the building plans. A building survey is a great source for this. If the footprint of the building stays consistent as it moves up. I've also found that measuring as-built or permit building plans can also increase the GFA off of what's listed on the plans itself. If you actually measure it to the exterior surface of the building, like is typically done with the sustainability consultants, green building consultants, that's what you typically measure out to. You can increase the GFA another 3-4%. Why is this important? The metric that's being used by Maryland BEPS, it's fossil fuel consumption usage on site divided by square footage. So if you can increase square footage, you have a better metric. You have a better performing building. So it's, taking into account the actual dimensions and size of the building, which unfortunately for a lot of multifamily properties, affordable housing properties can be difficult because not a lot of properties don't have plans. Next slide, please. So we'll take a look at some of the kind of lessons learned and challenges that we've had. We're right now doing a removing combustion in a community in Virginia. And really, when it comes to this type of work, the MEP engineer is critical. They're the key player. As we were planning out this renovation, I had interviewed the MEP engineer that the architect had wanted to use. After the interview, decided we actually need to get another MEP engineer involved on the project. The main reason for that was really a heat pump hot water system experience. So we'll have existing combustion central heat hot water systems, 17 of them, serving 8 to 12 units. We wanted to switch that to heat pump hot water systems, and central heat pump hot water systems are complicated, are complex, and it requires an MEP engineer, I think, with that experience. Another key thing that's been a challenge on multiple projects is having an MEP firm with in-house heavy up analysis capability. So as part of the design, we can actually switch to the next slide. As part of the design process, you want the MEP engineer to evaluate the electrical capacity and service of the building and all the components from the meter to the unit panels and the feeders and the rest to ensure that as you're designing and looking to remove combustion of the building, what's possible. Because that's really key in the design phase to figure out what's the most cost-effective and most feasible process to get there. So, and some MEP engineers that typically involved in sort of more vanilla type renovations of affordable housing haven't had this capability in-house, and I think that's critical so that it's early discussions and early planning in the design phase, and that has to be outsourced. So this one example, how electrical surface capacity can be, a key design decision is we had an MEP that did it in-house, has this analysis in-house. For this specific property, we have central hot water and laundry rooms, so we don't have to consider those uses and that kind of electrical capacity. But in unit, we had 100 amp breakers on the meter stacks. So in this case, the breakers are on where the utility meter is. We had designed for a cold climate heat pump without electric resistance backup heat and an electric range in unit. And so we were able to do all of that on 100 amps. At some point further down the design, as budget got tight, we wanted to look if we could potentially save some money, go to a lower efficiency heat pump, but that requires us to add in the heat strip, which would require 125 amp breakers. So new breakers, approval by the utility, replacing the feeder, the wiring from the meter to the panel, and potentially other additional costs that would wipe away most, if not all, savings from that switch to a lower efficiency equipment. The key thing here is cold climate heat pumps in this climate, I think is critical. And also the looking at not installing electric resistance backup heat. There's been a lot of issues in housing where that backup heat strip is operating more often than it should and causing resident bills to be higher than expected because they can't and aren't controlled properly by thermostats. And then just looking at some other designs that would recommend sort of a high performance MEP engineer heat pump hot water experience. There's some simpler systems, still have some unique challenges. Central, if you have a hot and chilled water plant, replacing that with a heat pump system is definitely doable, but that's quite a complex system that I think would require an MEP with that sort of experience with those types of systems. But those are the kind of the considerations that are the critical to make sure you have the success with these projects. Next slide, please. And then this last slide is really, I mentioned really key the efficiency versus operating cost. Looking at cold climate heat pumps without a backup heat kit so that resident operating costs aren't out of control because thermostats can't properly control the backup kit that should only operate for 1 or 2 days instead of a lot more often, as we've seen in some cases when it's installed. Key thing with efficiency is also the impact that it has as an operating cost. It goes hand in hand. On a water heating system, standard electric resistant uses 1 unit of energy, but that heat pump equivalent would use 30% of that electricity, 30 to 50%, maybe more if it's installed properly or not designed correctly. So big variance there. Similar to the variance of electric heat versus a heat pump for HVAC. A cooktop consideration, 5%, a 5 to 10% savings with induction versus the standard electric. Dryers is usually a minimal difference, but those are the kind of considerations to account for. The utility allowance is a complex and sort of it depends on the property, so don't want to dive too much into that, but that's a key consideration is the impact on resident operating cost. But thank you very much for your time. I'm happy to take any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. I'll go ahead and stop sharing and we can open up the Q&A portion. Folks need to come off mute and share their questions, or you're free to put them in the chat, both to Michael and Sam. Michael, I do have one quick question for you. I know you said initially that the architect brought the MEP in and needed the interviews and found somebody else, but do you have any tips on how folks can find MEPs that would be good to help with these projects?
That's a great question. I think if you look at some of the case studies or projects that have done this type of work, you might want to reach out and interview. I think some of the TA providers might have some suggestions on who to work with. I do as well, but there isn't a general resource for that.
Got it.
Unfortunately.
Maybe one day.
Sure.
Awesome. And while folks are still typing or thinking of questions, Sam, you had mentioned that one of the compliance pathways for affordable housing providers was to apply, or if they had applied for a certain program, a list of programs. Do you have the list of programs that are eligible to help them with that reduced compliance pathway or alternate compliance pathway? If I think it was, if they were approved for the program, but they hadn't started construction with that scope of work, if there's a list of programs that are eligible for that exemption.
I do not currently have a list of programs, and I would, um, refer back to, well, in our existing language of the federally administered program or Maryland administered program. Um, that process, like I said, is still a few years away, and those forms won't, um, be active for a bit. But I would, and I forgot to, mention this during my slides, but we do have an affordable housing working group that is active through that and is hosted by Maryland Department of the Environment, and specific for providers as it pertains to this program. And so I'd really recommend signing up for that, and we will email everyone as we host new working group sessions and also have updates on the program and um, you know, as you just asked Madeline, like eligible programs that we will send out to everyone. So I'll drop the email list in the chat, but I hope you all would sign up and consider participating in that working group. And we'll publish all new information for providers as it pertains to the program through that process.
Any other questions folks have? Also, totally understand that it is a short week and folks might want to get a head start on their PTO.
If I could
yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to jump in. I know I had mentioned a lot of resources and links throughout my slides. If I had to refer everyone to one web page at this time, just wanted to drop in the BEPS Getting Started page. That is kind of one-stop shop, determining if you've got a covered building and next steps for you, and also accessing that BEPS portal and the covered buildings map. So just wanted to drop that in there for easy access, but it will be, available through the PDF of the slides afterwards as well. But just wanted to make that right.
Yeah, good flag. Okay, we have a question in the chat. When benchmarking, is it possible that a particularly warm or cold year would skew a building's baseline? Could the heating energy be artificially high or low due to weather?
So, yes, definitely that, weather and temperature and changing situations with, utility use could skew a building's performance, in any given year. I'd note that the baseline year for this program is the 2025 calendar year energy use data that you'll submit in June 1, 2026. So not this year isn't, for this first benchmarking submission doesn't establish your baseline. And right now the baseline isn't really that crucial. So, the assessment of emissions performance and standards are really going to be taken into account in 2030 when those payments and performance compared to the standards are assessed. So I wouldn't necessarily be overly concerned with baseline performance at this time. But heating and or like high or low temperature days can affect a building's performance, for the via its data in Portfolio Manager.
While folks are typing any other questions, just want to quickly flag our next webinar, which is in 2 weeks, still on Thursday at 10 a.m. We're going to walk through some various case studies, some clean energy case studies that highlight the scopes of work, energy and cost savings, and funds that were leveraged by the project to help complete the scope of work. Following that session, we'll talk through the various funding sources at the state and federal level that can be used to help complement a clean energy scope of work. Then in August, we'll talk about energy audits, zero time plans, and how to successfully engage residents. So you should all have these invites on your calendar. But if you don't, you can let me know and I can make sure you get the Zoom link. And if you're participating in Track 2 TA, you should have received an email from Alex last week inviting you to schedule that initial kickoff call. If you haven't already reached out to Alex or Safe to get that scheduled, please do so, so they can help, whether it's getting your data in Energy Star, whether it's just looking at your portfolio's performance, whatever it may be. It's a good first step. So make sure you respond to Alex there. Any other questions before we hop? We send a couple minutes early. Well, thanks, Sam and Michael, so much for being with us this morning. We'll share the slides out afterwards so you'll all have time to review. And we'll also have their contact information in case there's any questions as you're looking at those resources. But I hope everyone enjoys the long weekend.
Thanks everyone. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.